The year is 2018. The room smells of old wood and stale coffee. It's the county courthouse annex, a place for auctions and foreclosures, a place where legacies end. The auctioneer, a lawyer in a tired suit, reads from a document. His voice is flat, monotonous. He reads the parcel number. Section 14, Township 3 North, 320 acres of prime bottomland. The Miller Farm. For generations, the Miller Farm. He clears his throat, reads the winning bid, a number with a lot of zeros. Then he reads the name of the buyer, Arwood Family Holdings, LLC. The room is quiet. A few people shift in their hard wooden chairs. In the back row, a young man sits beside his father. He is Tom Miller, Jr., grandson of Frank Miller. He hears the name Arwood, and his face goes pale. He leans over to his father. He whispers something. Is that him? His father just stares ahead. His jaw is tight. He gives a single, slow nod. The lawyer continues reading the legal descriptions, but Tom Miller Jr. isn't listening anymore. He's thinking about a story his grandfather used to tell. A story told with a sad shake of the head. About the poor Arwood boy. The one who lost his father too young. The one who tried to farm on his own. The one who was going to be bankrupt by Christmas. His grandfather had told him that story for 40 years. A cautionary tale. A lesson in humility. A lesson in knowing your limits. And now, the Arwood boy owned his grandfather's land. The gap between the story he was told and the name on that deed was a canyon. A 40-year canyon of silence and work. This channel tells the stories from inside that canyon. The stories of people who were written off. The people who were told no, not out of malice, but out of concern. The ones who refused to accept the ending someone else wrote for them. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because the quietest people often have the most to teach us. And we have more stories just like this one coming. You won't want to miss them. Now let me take you back. Let me take you to the beginning of that 40-year silence. The year is 1978, October. The leaves are turning on the oak trees that line the county road. The air has the sharp, clean smell of coming winter. James Arwood is 22 years old. He stands in the yard of his family's farm. It's not much of a farm, just 80 acres. Most of it is hilly pasture, not good for crops. The farmhouse needs paint. The barn roof sags in the middle. His father, John Arwood, had died in August. A heart attack while mending a fence. Sudden and silent. James had been away, working on a construction crew up north, trying to earn enough money to help keep this place afloat. He came home for the funeral and never left. The farm was his now. So was the debt. The bank held the note. The equipment was old. The main tractor, a Massey Ferguson 135, was from the 60s. It leaked oil and the hydraulics were weak. The combine was a pull-behind model. It was obsolete. The 1970s were a brutal time for small farmers. Fuel prices were high. Commodity prices were low. The government was telling everyone to get big or get out. James knew he was supposed to get out. Everyone knew it. The farm was a memory, not a future. His father had held on through sheer stubbornness, a quiet man who believed in the dirt. The dirt is all we really own, he'd say. They can't take the dirt. But the bank could, and they would. James had one chance. He needed to plant a winter wheat crop. He needed to do it now. But his drill was broken. A bearing had seized. The parts were no longer made. He couldn't afford a new one, not even a used one that worked. He needed a loan, just a small one, a few $1,000s, enough to get a decent used drill and some seed. The bank had already turned him down. He had no collateral they wanted. The land was already leveraged. There was only one other person he could ask. Frank Miller, his neighbor to the west. Frank's farm was everything theirs was not. 1,000 acres, flat, black soil, new sheds gleaming in the sun, 2 new John Deere tractors in the machine shed, a brand new combine. Frank Miller was the model of success. He was on the bank board. He was a deacon at the church. He was a good man. Everyone said so. Frank had been kind after James's father died, brought over a ham, told James if he needed anything, just to ask. So, on a Tuesday afternoon, James R. Wood put on his cleanest shirt. He walked the half-mile down the gravel road. He stood at the door of Frank Miller's pristine farmhouse. Frank invited him in. They sat at the kitchen table. Frank's wife brought them coffee. The kitchen was warm. It smelled like baked bread. James felt small in that kitchen. He felt poor. He explained his situation. He didn't ask for a handout. He asked if Frank would co-sign a loan at the bank.
Just for the drill. He had it all figured out on a piece of paper. The cost, the potential yield, the price he could get for the wheat, how he would pay it back by summer. He spoke quietly. He laid his plan out on the table like a hand of cards. Frank Miller listened. He nodded. He looked at the numbers on the paper. He stirred his coffee. He was a big man, calloused hands, a kind face. He had known James his whole life. He had respected James's father, even if he thought he was a fool for not modernizing. When James was finished, Frank leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked under his weight. He sighed. It was a long, slow, patient sigh. He looked at James with genuine pity. "Son," he said, "I can't do that." James felt the floor drop out from under him. Frank continued. His voice was gentle. It was the voice of a man who was certain he was doing the right thing. "I've been farming this land for 30 years, James. I've seen men with more than you lose everything. The margins are too thin. That old tractor of yours won't pull a modern drill. Even if it did, what about the fertilizer, the fuel? What if the price of wheat drops? What if you get a bad storm?" He picked up the piece of paper with James's numbers. He held it like it was a losing lottery ticket. "These numbers are hopeful, son. Farming isn't about hope. It's about managing risk, and you are too big of a risk." James just sat there. He couldn't speak. It wasn't anger he felt, not contempt. Something softer and in some ways worse. It was the feeling of being erased. Frank leaned forward. He put his big hand on James's shoulder. "I'm telling you this for your own good. I liked your father. I respect his memory. I'm not going to be the man who helps a good boy lose his father's legacy. Sell the farm, James. Sell it to me. I'll give you a fair price, more than the bank will give you at auction. You can take the money, go to the city, get a trade. You're a hard worker. You'll do well. This life is over for farms this small. It's a kindness to let it go. Don't drag it out. Don't lose everything for nothing." James finally found his voice. It was barely a whisper. "I can make it work." Frank shook his head slowly, a sad, knowing smile on his face. "No, son, you can't. If you try to do this, you'll be bankrupt by Christmas. I won't be a part of that. I'm sorry. Bankrupt by Christmas." The words hung in the warm, clean kitchen. They were not an insult. They were a prophecy, delivered by a good man who believed he was saving a young man from himself. James stood up. He thanked Frank for the coffee. He walked out of the house.
He didn't look back. He walked the half-mile home. The gravel crunched under his boots. The kindest refusals are the sharpest knives. They don't just cut you. They convince you that you deserved to be cut, that the wound is for your own good. Anger is a fire. You can use it as fuel, but the certainty of a good man, that's a different kind of poison. It seeps into the ground of your own belief. It tells you that you are the one who is wrong. James got back to his own yard. The paint was peeling on his house. The barn roof was still sagging. Everything Frank said was true. It was logical. It was reasonable. It was the end of the line. He went inside. His mother was sitting at their own kitchen table. The table was old, scarred with knife marks from 3 generations of Arwoods. She looked at his face. She didn't have to ask. She knew. He told her what Frank had said. He told her the words, "Bankrupt by Christmas." He sat down, the weight of it all pressing on him. "Maybe he's right," he said. "Maybe we should just sell." His mother, a woman who rarely spoke more than 10 words at a time, reached across the table. She put her hand on his. Her skin was like paper. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear. "Your father always said this dirt remembers," she said. "It remembers the sweat he put into it. It won't forget you." They took everything from us during the Depression. Everything except the dirt. The dirt is enough. That was all she said. The dirt is enough. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a solution. It was a statement of faith. And in that quiet, dusty kitchen, it was the only thing James had left to hold on to. He spent that night in the barn, staring at the broken grain drill. Frank Miller's words echoed in his head. Bankrupt by Christmas. But his mother's words were a quiet hum underneath. The dirt is enough. He couldn't afford a new drill. He couldn't fix the old one. He couldn't plant wheat. Frank was right about all of that. So he had to change the question. It wasn't about how to do what everyone else was doing. It was about what he could do with what he had. He had 80 acres. He had an old tractor that ran. He had a few hand tools. He had a well. And he had the dirt. The next morning, he got an idea. A crazy idea. An idea born of desperation. He took a piece of paper and a pencil. He started sketching, not a financial plan, a map. He walked out to the 5-acre plot right behind the house, the one with the best soil, the one his father had always used for the family garden. He measured it out. He spent the next week with a mold-board plow turning that soil over. He didn't plant wheat. He planted garlic, rows and rows of it. He planted spinach and kale. He planted late-season lettuce, crops that could survive a frost. His neighbors watched him. They saw him working by hand. They saw the small, strange plots. They thought he had lost his mind. "What's the boy doing?" they'd ask each other at the feed store. Frank Miller drove past one day. He saw James on his hands and knees planting garlic cloves one by one. He slowed his big new truck. He just shook his head and drove on. The prophet, watching his prophecy come true. James ignored them. He worked from sunup to sundown. He built cold frames out of old windows and scrap lumber. He was building a lifeboat, not a battleship. By late November, things were growing, patches of green against the brown earth. He didn't have a market. He didn't have a contract. He had no idea how he would sell any of it. One day, he went into the old barn. He found a pile of weathered gray barn wood. He found some old white paint. He took a saw and a hammer. He built a small, rough table. He took a wide piece of wood and a brush. In simple block letters, he painted a sign. Arwood Farm, fresh vegetables. He took the table and the sign. He carried them out to the end of his driveway, right on the county road. He harvested a few bunches of kale, a dozen heads of lettuce. He washed them in the kitchen sink. He put them in a wicker basket on the table. He put a coffee can next to it with a few dollar bills inside for change. Then he went back to work in the field. He didn't expect to sell anything. It was a gesture of defiance, a signal to himself that he was still fighting. An hour later, he heard a car stop. He looked up. A woman from town was standing at the little stand. She picked up a head of lettuce. She looked at it. She put $2 in the can. She got in her car and drove away. It was $2. It felt like $1 million. That first week, he made $40. The next week, $60. People started talking. The crazy Arwood boy was selling vegetables in the middle of winter. And they were good, fresh, better than the tired stuff at the grocery store. Christmas came. James Arwood was not bankrupt. He was exhausted. He was cold, but he was not bankrupt. He had a few $100s in a jar in the kitchen. He had paid the electric bill. He had bought groceries. He had survived. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend. By someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. Have you ever had to stand against the weight of someone else's kind, reasonable, soul-crushing certainty? Let me know in the comments below, because proving that kind of person wrong is the loneliest fight there is. And James Arwood's fight was just beginning, because what he did next wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building something new on the ruins of the old way. The next few years were a blur of work. Each spring he planted more. He added tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash. He learned about succession planting. He learned about cover crops. He read books from the library. He talked to old-timers. He learned the forgotten arts of small-scale farming. The farm stand at the end of the driveway became a permanent fixture. He built a small roof over it. Some people still laughed. They called it the rabbit food stand. But more and more cars were stopping. Frank Miller never stopped, but he saw the cars. He heard the talk at the co-op. He saw James at the hardware store buying seeds, not begging for credit. He never said a word about it. He just watched, a quiet witness to a story that wasn't going the way he had predicted. The community started to split. There were the doubters, the ones who farmed the way their fathers had. Big acreage, big machines, big debt. They saw James as an oddity, a throwback. He's not a real farmer, they'd say. He's just a gardener with a big garden. It's a novelty. It won't last. But there were others, the quiet admirers, older farmers who remembered a time before the big banks and the chemical companies, women from town who liked knowing where their food came from. One of them was a man named Earl Johnson. He farmed a small plot down the road. One day, the hydraulics on James's old Massey Ferguson finally gave out for good. He was stuck. He couldn't cultivate his fields. Earl showed up that afternoon with his own tractor. It was almost as old as James's, but it ran. He didn't say much, just, "Looks like you could use a hand." He spent the next 3 days helping James finish his fieldwork. When they were done, James tried to pay him. Earl just waved his hand. "Don't be foolish," he said. "Your dad helped my father rebuild his barn after the '58 tornado. We keep our accounts long around here." It was a small act of grace, a reminder that a community is more than just a collection of opinions. It's a web of debts and kindnesses that stretches back generations. Now, let me tell you about the next 30 years. Because this is where the story of a small farm stand becomes the story of an empire built on dirt and determination. It happened slowly, then all at once. The rhythm of it was tied to the seasons: plant, grow, harvest, sell, save, repeat. 1982. A small parcel of land next to his came up for sale. 10 acres. The owner had passed away. His kids wanted to sell it quick. James went to the family. He made an offer. He had the money saved in a coffee can. He paid for it in cash. He tilled it that fall and planted strawberries the next spring. 1985. He needed to extend his growing season. He bought a used greenhouse frame. He found salvaged glass. He built a 3,000 square foot greenhouse himself. He paid for it all in cash. He started selling tomatoes in May instead of July. He sold lettuce all winter long. "The dirt remembers," his mother would say. 1990. The farm stand was too small. Cars were lining up on the county road. He took the profits from the last 2 years. He hired a local crew. He built a proper farm market, a simple pole barn structure, with a walk-in cooler and a real checkout counter. He paid for every nail, every board, every wire. Cash. Frank Miller's son got married that year. They had a big reception. They served beef from cattle fed on corn grown on their 1,000 acres. James Arwood catered the salad bar, with lettuce and tomatoes grown on his 20. No one mentioned the irony, but everyone knew. 1995. His old Massey Ferguson was tired. It was time. James drove to the John Deere dealership in town, the same dealership where Frank Miller bought his massive new machines. The salesman, a young man who didn't know the history, tried to sell him on a financing plan. James just smiled. He pointed to a 90-horsepower 4455 model, a beautiful, powerful machine. "I'll take that one," he said. The salesman started writing up the paperwork. He asked for James's financials for the loan application. James shook his head. "Won't be needing that." He pulled a checkbook from his coat pocket. He wrote a check for the full amount, $53,000. Cash. The salesman stared at the check. He had never seen anyone do that before. Not for a tractor that size. James drove the new tractor home himself. It gleamed green and yellow in the sun. As he turned into his driveway, he saw Frank Miller out in his field on his own enormous tractor. Frank stopped. He watched James drive past. The two men were maybe 100 yards apart. Two different worlds. One built on debt. The other built on dirt. Frank didn't wave. He just watched. The prophecy was broken. Christmas had come and gone nearly 20 times, and the Arwood boy was still here. The decades kept turning. 2000. James bought another 40 acres. Cash. He started a pick-your-own pumpkin patch and apple orchard. It became a local institution. 2005. He bought the 60 acres on his other side. Cash. He was now farming 200 acres, all of it paid for, all of it profitable. His farm market was now a destination. He employed 15 people from the local community. He sold his own produce, but also baked goods, local honey, and crafts. He had created his own economy. He didn't depend on the commodity markets in Chicago. He didn't depend on the big chemical companies. He didn't depend on the banks. He depended on the people who drove to his farm every week. He depended on the dirt. Meanwhile, the world Frank Miller had mastered was changing. Fuel prices soared. Commodity prices crashed, then spiked, then crashed again. The debt required to farm at that scale became a crushing weight. Frank had expanded in the 90s. He had bought more land, bigger equipment. He had taken on massive loans to do it. He was leveraged to the hilt. He was a master of a game that was rigged against him. He just didn't know it yet. But that's not the end of the story. What happened next changed everything. It was a quiet afternoon in the fall of 2010, 32 years after that meeting in the kitchen. James was in his office at the back of the market. He was going over invoices. His daughter, Sarah, now ran the day-to-day operations. She came to the door. "Dad," she said, "there's someone here to see you. It's Frank Miller." James hadn't spoken to Frank in over 3 decades. They saw each other in town. They nodded. That was it. James walked out into the market. It was bustling with customers. Frank was standing by the apple display. He looked old, smaller than James remembered. The certainty had gone out of his eyes. He was just a tired old man. He was holding a single apple. He looked at James. "You've done well, James," he said. His voice was raspy. James just nodded. "Thank you, Frank." Frank looked around the store, at the families, the children laughing, at the shelves piled high with food grown from the earth. "I was wrong," he said. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but in the noise of the market it was as loud as a thunderclap. "I was wrong about you." James waited. He didn't know what to say. "What do you say to the man who pronounced your professional death sentence?" Frank continued. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you. I was so sure. I built my whole life on being sure about things, and I was wrong." He looked down at the apple in his hand. "The bank is calling my notes," he said. "My son is trying to hold it all together, but I don't see how. We took a hard loss on corn this year." He looked back up at James. There was a question in his eyes, a desperate, unspoken question. He was asking for help, for advice, for absolution. And in that moment, James Arwood felt the full weight of the last 32 years. The cold mornings, the aching back, the quiet fear, the condescending looks, the lonely fight. He looked at the man who had set him on that path. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel pity. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a deep, profound sadness. He finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it was devastating in its precision. "You were trying to be kind, Frank. I know that. I've always known that. But your kindness was heavier than any man's cruelty. Because I couldn't fight it, I could only outlive it. You didn't just refuse me alone. You refused me the dignity of my own failure. You decided for me what I was capable of. It took me 30 years to get my father's name clear of the doubt you put on it in this community. 30 years. Frank Miller just stood there. The apple fell from his hand. It rolled under a display of pumpkins. He turned and walked out of the store. He didn't look back. That was the last time James ever spoke to him. Frank Miller passed away 2 years later. His son tried to keep the farm going, but the debt was too much. He started selling off parcels. First, 100 acres to a developer for a housing subdivision, then another 50. The empire of debt crumbled, until all that was left was the 320 acres of prime bottomland. Which brings us back to that auction in 2018, when Arwood Family Holdings bought the last piece of the Miller farm. James didn't do it out of spite. He did it because it was good land, and he knew what to do with good land. He wasn't buying a victory. He was buying dirt, because the dirt is enough. The story doesn't end there. A victory for one man is just a story. A legacy that changes a community, that's something more. James Arwood didn't just build a farm, he built a new map for others to follow. In the early 2000s, he started noticing young people showing up at his farm, kids who hadn't grown up on farms. They had degrees in agriculture from big universities, but they didn't know how to grow food. They knew how to grow commodities. They knew about spreadsheets and futures markets. They didn't know about soil health. They didn't know about direct marketing. They were looking for a different way. So James started a program, an apprenticeship. He'd take on 2 young farmers each year. He gave them a small salary, a place to live in an old tenant house, and 5 acres of land. He taught them everything he knew: how to plant, how to weed, how to harvest, how to build a customer base, how to manage money, how to stay out of debt. He taught them the religion of cash. He taught them that the dirt remembers. Over the last 20 years, more than 40 young farmers have come through his program. They are now running their own successful small farms all over the state. They are the Arwood disciples, spreading a gospel of self-sufficiency. One of them, a young woman named Maria, now runs a 30-acre organic farm that supplies 3 of the best restaurants in the city. She says James didn't just teach her how to farm. He taught her how to believe in a future that everyone else told her was impossible. Then there's the scholarship. In 2015, James and his wife endowed a scholarship at the local high school, the John Arwood Memorial Scholarship. It gives $10,000 every year to a student who wants to study sustainable agriculture. Not corporate agriculture, sustainable agriculture. The first recipient was the son of a dairy farmer who had gone bankrupt. That boy is now getting his PhD in soil science. He plans to come back home and work with local farmers. The legacy is not in the land James bought. It's in the futures he's building for others. It's a quiet revolution, happening in the fields and farmers' markets. A revolution against the tyranny of good intentions, against the soft, smiling face of limitation. Today, if you go to Arwood Farm Market, you can see it. In the back office, hanging on the wall, is a piece of weathered gray barnwood. The letters are faded. Arwood Farm, fresh vegetables. It's the original sign, the one he painted in 1978. The one he put at the end of his driveway with a coffee can for a cash register. His granddaughter, who is now studying business at the state university, sometimes brings her friends to the farm. She always shows them the sign. She runs her hand over the rough wood. "This is where it all started," she says, "with one man, no money, and an idea that everyone said was crazy." The sign is a physical artifact, a piece of the past that proves the present was not inevitable. It's a reminder that the most powerful things are often built not with loans and leverage, but with splinters in your hands and dirt under your fingernails. It's a reminder that sometimes the only person who can see the future is the one who has been told they don't have one. Right now, somewhere in the world, a person with a dream is sitting in an office, or a kitchen, or a bank, and they are being told no. They are being told it's impossible, that they are a risk, that it's for their own good. The person telling them no is not a villain. They are a good person, a reasonable person, a person who is certain. The most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. Certainty about another person's capabilities, delivered with kindness, is more damaging than outright hostility, because it cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven. With decades of quiet, relentless, unending work. James Arwood's story is not about farming. It's about the profound gap between what others decide for you and what you can actually do. It's a story about the quiet courage it takes to stand in that gap and start building anyway. To lay a foundation on the ground of your own belief, even when you're the only one who can see it. If this story means something to you, subscribe to this channel. We are dedicated to finding and sharing the histories that get forgotten. The quiet triumphs that change the world in small, vital ways. And in the comments below, tell us about a time that someone's doubt became your fuel. A time you were told no, and you did it anyway. Finally, if you know someone who is facing their own bankrupt by Christmas moment, someone who needs to hear that the long game is the only game that matters, share this story with them. Because sometimes, the simple act of seeing it can be done is the only permission we need to begin.